I'm Whitley. In my day job, I'm director of HR technology at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, Oklahoma. On the side, I've been doing lots of LinkedIn writing and posting, and I'm really passionate about providing resources for HRIS and HR tech people. It's a very kind of isolating, lonely. I think I was talking to somebody the other day, they were talking about how HR in general is kind of isolating because people are scared of HR. You know, we're kind of like the police of the organization. And then I think HRIS is like even a subset of that because you're not really an HR person, you're not really an IT person. So anyway, so my goal is to try to promote knowledge and community within that group. Um, and then I got linked up with John Kelly on here, who's created this HR science group and is doing these weekly meetups, and we're creating video series and doing a lot of writing. So I'm excited to be part of that. But anyways, I know like for those of us in HRIS, HR tech, Excel is like a big, you love it, you hate it, you have to use it a lot regardless. So I thought it'd be awesome to get an Excel expert on the call that can kind of walk us through that. So I'll turn it over to David to introduce himself.
So let me do what I can to lower any expectations here. Um, I've been working with Excel for 27 years now, but I have actually learned more Excel in the last 2 years than I did in the 2 decades before. In part because what I was doing with Excel in my prior job, you know, there was a set thing that we needed to do, and there wasn't a whole lot of need to expand beyond that. I worked for a stock market research company, so I worked with a lot of database and a lot of time series data, but the tools that Microsoft has been adding to Excel has completely reshaped the way I approach it, really twice over the past 18 months. And we're actually increasingly getting to a point, in my opinion, where, you know, unless you spend a lot of time in Excel, there's going to be limits to what you can do. But the fundamental piece of Excel is if you're having trouble with a spreadsheet, it probably comes down to design. Excel should be a joy to work with, and it becomes easy to work with if you've got a solid design on it. Every spreadsheet that I make follows the same design pattern. I isolate what data I need for it. I find a way to bring that data into the spreadsheet, whether it's manually entering Power Query or whatever, and then I create reports, graphs, whatever to use that data. But it always ends up in that fixed structure of all the data resides in one place, usually out of the way. There's a way to get the data in there, and then we just use it. And if you build your spreadsheets with that kind of structure, you're going to find you have a lot less frustration on it. So that's the long and short of me and my philosophy on Excel. So I'm happy to open the floor to any kind of questions. Is that Daniel? Hi.
Hey, sorry. No, I don't think I meant to raise my hand yet. I'm just in a library, so
Sorry. No problem.
I'll think of a question that will come up. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
I was doing a headcount report the other day, and I had asked for ChatGPT to then give me a proper way of doing it. It gave me ifs and and functions, which was all right, but definitely an ugly way to brute force it. And that was mostly because my prompt was awful. But I've noticed when I pull information using Power Query that I cannot then, like, none of the what do you call it? The number functions, the way that you categorize the cell as a date or whatever it is, work right beside a right in a table that was pulled in from a Power Query. Does that make sense? Did I phrase the question properly?
So you've defined the data types in Power Query, but the cells in the return table don't match the types you did?
No, I have I've done the Power Query, but now I'm trying to do like calculations beside it using the data in the table that was pulled with
Okay.
Power Query. And so I have this expectation that I should be able to go, hey, between this date and this date, how many people do I have for a head count? And the calculation is right beside it, but I guess when I've extended the table, it clears out all of those um cell types and it kind of breaks it, which I was bashing my head against for a little while.
I have definitely encountered some interesting idiosyncrasies, to say the least, when you end up adding data to a table in Power Query. I've often actually used a little bit of VBA alongside that to reinstate those formulas and to make sure that they fill down the entire additional columns if you do it that way. Now, if you do the formulas to the side of the table, and if you're looking for summary stuff, I would recommend building that outside the table. Use a table as the source, but don't make them columns inside the table. You shouldn't actually need them to be inside the table for that. Do you actually
Okay.
have a spreadsheet that you can share your screen to show me?
I'd have to pull it up. I don't have it right at this moment, but I can probably see if I can pull it up a little bit later if
Yeah.
anybody else has better questions.
Go ahead and get it ready. Like if anyone has, specific spreadsheets they have questions on, if you have them ready, we can, share them on the screen. It'd be a nice way to take a look, and then it makes it very visible for everyone to do. Let me share my screen for just a second. I opened up a handful of spreadsheets before we started. So I created this spreadsheet just as a sample of some tabular data. Whenever I end up with a table, I use that as a source and do all my reporting and calculations elsewhere. I like to just keep my stuff separate from my source. Sorry about that. So what I ended up doing is building a series of dynamic array formulas to extract data from this one. So here, I'm basically mimicking a pivot table. And so I've got year, quarter, region, category, and amount. And I just create some basic drop downs here to be able to sum up those results based upon whether either region or by category. And then I have a sum if statement in here. So I'm summing up the amount based upon, and I'm doing filters on this, but this type of, actually, this is probably better. Sorry, I don't know how visible this is on screen, but I'm doing a unique selection of the ranges here to get my column headers and breaking that out from the table. So this gives me an array of, in this case, categories to be able to tabulate the total amount. So you might be able to do something similar to that in your head count. Are those broken out by groupings, or are you just looking for an aggregate on the head count?
They are broken down by groupings because what I was trying to do was determine the churn in a graduate program versus the churn across the rest of the organization and just do a comparison. So I have pulled it up. It's a bit ugly. I've definitely upgraded to a better modality using countouts, but this was my struggle. I don't know. How do I go about share screen?
Yeah, share screen down at the bottom there.
Okay, let's take a look here. I think I just want to share this one here. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
So this is the head count. This is the information that I had pulled in Power Query in the green, and these were the calculations that I were doing right beside it. And at the time I was just going, hey, if this person is here in between these dates, then I would count them as a yes, and then I would do a head count. that it wasn't the best way to go about it, but it was the only way that I could think of at the time.
Okay.
And then I would indicate whether there were a regional headcount or a graduate. And this, every time I had the table, I guess, extended, it just kind of turned it not into a date. And it was extremely frustrating.
So what was extending your table?
I think I was just trying to extend the table because I wanted it to filter so that I could confirm if I was having the appropriate head count.
Okay, gotcha. So typically what I would do in a situation like this is completely separate your reporting from your table. Because you don't even need the yes and no's in those individual columns. You can pull that out based upon the hire date and the termination date just with some ifs. So similar to
Yeah,
that formula, or I guess count is technically.
yeah.
Similar.
I've now learned that, but
Okay.
this is my first initial crack at it, and I brute force this for about 4 hours with an unpleasant experience.
No, they tend to be. Countifs and sumifs have become two of my favorite functions simply because you can do that kind of analysis. You know, you just need to get creative on what your conditions are for it.
Yeah.
I have done some where, if you have, say, one date, you want to say it's within is it in this quarter? Um,
Hmm.
you can use, um, greater than or equal to, higher date, well, EO month on higher date, and go back, basically use a mod or a similar formula to say to find the beginning of that quarter, and then the same
Yeah.
thing to find the end of that quarter, and do those kind of things so that all of your Y's and N's there, or Y's and blanks, would be just part of that summary calculation.
Yeah. Because in the end, I mean, this is essentially what I wanted, right? It was just this table
Right.
over here, but it was the best that I could come up with at the time. This was me prompting ChatGPT, and that was what they had come up with, was a series of ifs and functions. And then when I went home and asked my partner, I was like, this is incredibly frustrating. There's got to be a better way to do this. He prompted ChatGPT, and they came up with a different one, which was the countifs functions. And I got it done in about half an hour. That's like even scrubbing the data and all that stuff. And it's a huge difference in time between brute forcing like 4 hours versus half an hour.
And if these end up being reports that you need on a regular basis in specific categories, you could even do that kind of grouping in Power Query and just return separate tables that give you those summary results. It takes additional
How would I,
steps down through there.
yeah, how would I go about doing that?
Um, Usually, what I'll do to create those additional tables is I'll get it up to a point where perhaps where you have it now. And so
Yeah,
create this is my source table. So I've only refined this once, and then
yeah.
start new queries that reference that. And give me an example of what you need to find on this.
Well, like I said, it was the whether or not someone was present for this month to calculate the churn between whether an individual is a candidate versus just the regular overall head count, right? And then I'm just calculating the churn percentage from
Okay.
there.
So you would probably need an additional date parameter that so you could change it to each time you ran the query, which
Yeah.
you can pass that into Power Query as a named range. Though generally, I find it easiest to do them as create a table with those dates, and then do data from a table or range, and then as it pulls it up, drill down to that specific cell you want where it's always going to be, and then that becomes a parameter that you can use inside of Power Query.
Okay. So I've only been playing with Power Query for the past month or so. So is that something where I would be adding like a column, or how do I go
Let me
about
see.
doing that?
If Let me find an open spreadsheet that I have that might let me get there quickly.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I'll stop sharing then.
Hold on just 1 second. All right, let me share my screen again here. So in this one, I just created an additional table here that I call file location. I'm using this to bring in the source file for a query.
Mm-hmm.
So let me go to the data page. I did it from table range, but now I already have this loaded in there. So I'm going to go into the Power Query editor. And let me stop sharing and reshare so I can share the Power Query editor. Sorry about that. You can tell I'm not on Zoom too often. All right, sorry about that. And so this is my file location table. If we go up to the source, we can see the entire table. It's blank right now. And then you get the standard change type. And then you can click on one of the cells and say drill down, which is what I did at the next step. And then all it returns is that value. And so now, again, it's null because there's nothing there. But this becomes a parameter that you can use inside a Power Query. So if I go back to my source here, instead of having the source of the file, it's now using that variable. And you can do the same thing in your query. You could set that equal to, and you usually have to do something like some dummy value, like one of your things, like, region 1 or whatever. And then just with whatever step it creates, just replace that with your variable. And then that variable is in there. And then every time you update your parameter on the worksheet side, refresh your query, that'll now come all in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that in a YouTube video, but I've never actually executed on it yet.
I have a post on LinkedIn where I actually go through creating one of these parameter queries, and I have the sample file there. You could always download that and take a look through. But that would allow you to do what you're looking to do with that query, and then you could then basically filter for when your two dates are on the correct sides of that parameter. It's going to remove those rows. You could then do a count on those, and then your final results is the count of the results you're looking for. And at that point, you could create multiple queries that go down each of the criteria you want, give them name labels, and append those all together. So each of those queries get stacked and return one thing with all of your head counts. So basically duplicate the table you built down there.
Okay.
I think the way you did it with sum ifs and count ifs is the ideal way to go and is the preferred way to go. But you can open up Power Query with that.
Okay. All right. And that would be repeatable months over month.
And as Keith notes in the chat, the array formulas and SumProc, which is basically what you did, do end up being better alternatives. But if you want to keep things in Power Query, you do have that option to do that.
Okay.
Hey,
Thank
David,
you.
can I ask you a question?
Yep, please.
Nice to finally chat with you, by the way.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, and I know you and I have chatted many times now, that it seems to me that these new formulas and functions, dynamic arrays, once you start working with them, they're not super difficult, like sort, unique, filter. They spill into multiple cells, which is weird when you first look at them.
It is.
But I don't find them, now that I've been working with them, super difficult. But I know the real power, and we've talked about this, is using these newer functions of let and lambda that you
Yes.
can really do a lot of really complex reporting. One of them, which I know would probably be like applicable to HR, would be to have a report of, say, headcount by department. And as things change, that report would shrink or expand dynamically. So I'm just curious, maybe some of the people here aren't aware of those functions. If you could talk about them, and I do find them, I haven't really spent as much time as I'd like to. I plan to. I'm really getting up to speed on them. Is there a good way to learn them? And can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The best way to learn them really is just by experimenting with them. I've gotten really into Lambda lately, and it's incredibly powerful. And it's beautiful. But I always start this by making them as let formulas. Let me share my screen one more time. So this is almost exactly what you were just talking about, Jeff. So this is a pricing catalog. I tweaked it from a spreadsheet I made for a client. So this is all fictitious data, but basically we now have a toy guide with all of our different categories. All these are created by a single formula. It's a lambda I created called task group stack. And this lambda invokes a lambda called task group that will break out one of these groupings. So, we've got our Barbie product line here, and everything here was returned by a single lambda. But because we're going to want multiple products in here, we're going to stack them. And then I attach this to some slicers that go on a pivot table on the side. So now I can, if I knock out, or actually, let me. So now Barbie's gone. It's just GI Joe. And so this one formula will expand or contract with whatever you're looking to do. This becomes an incredibly powerful reporting tool because you can show exactly and only what you want. But it's a learning curve to get here. So if you have the time to play around with let and lambda, I recommend it. What I recommend most, though, is start with those basic array formulas and start building your way up and say, okay, how can I stop working with individual cells and start working with just a cluster of cells? So going back to that one that I designed for this presentation, this is a simple if statement. Increase my zoom real quick. So now I've got a basic if statement where if I'm looking for the region, I'm going to do a sort on that table, bring out the regions, and just alphabetize them. And if I want to do the same thing, I do the same thing with categories. So right now I have the categories up. So all of them are showing up here in alphabetical order. And instead of addressing each individual cell, I can address them as a unit. And I'm going to do that with my sum if statement here. So, and this is what you were working with, Tammy, in your head count. You're using counters instead of sumifs, but the logic is the same. So I'm going to sum the total amount spent, and I need to address both my column headers and my row headers here. So if it's category, I'm going to look where the category is equal to whatever's in this. Otherwise, I look for whatever the region is. And so basically, I need to address whatever's going to be in this cell here, whether it's category or region. I'm just going to use an if statement to look at the right column. Same thing at the top. I can choose either year, quarter, or year, quarter to expand those out. I'm going to go back to year just because it's easier to see and easier to understand. Stop. So I need to address both the year and the quarter because it could be either of those in there. So if I can find year in the my category, I know I need to address the year. If not, I'm just going to throw some dummy number in there where it's not 1111. My year is never going to be that. So that will always evaluate to true if I'm not addressing an individual year. Otherwise, I'm going to look at the value of the 4 leftmost characters in my year statement. So again, it's just going to be a year. If it's year quarter, the left is going to be year. So I've now successfully addressed that. And I'm going to do the same thing with the quarter, where if I'm not looking at the quarter, I'm going to do where the quarter is not 1111. Again, I'm just throwing it away so that I can always evaluate to true. I could just simply put true in there, and the same thing will happen. Otherwise, I evaluate my quarter. And now what I've done, because I have L3 here for my row headers and M2 here for my column headers, this one formula fills out the entire range of cells. No longer am I doing a sum ifs in each cell. I'm doing one sum ifs for the entire range of cells. Now we have the issue of, okay, what happens if I get more categories or I add additional years? Well, my cells will automatically spill over. But as you know from the kind of work you do, you often want to have a totals column somewhere in there. So how do I do a totals if I don't know how far this is going to spill? And this is what Jeff's talking about. This is where a let comes in. So let's see if I can do this live. I'm only going to go so far with it, but data array. So here's my data array, and that's everything that I'm returning so far. And right now, I'm just going to return my data array. And so I return that. And so everything looks normal. Well, what if I want to do something with that? Let's do.
And data array is something you've defined.
Something I've defined. That's what so if you've done any work in Visual Basic or any other kind of program, you can define your variables and then assign values to them. That lets you do the same thing, where I'm defining this value as data array and then saying what it is. And in this case, it is a set of sales. We would call it that. Sales sums. It's the sum of sales based on a set of criteria. So let's try and create a summary of that. So sales totals. I want to do this by column. So I'll use the by col formula. I'm going to pass in that grid that we already know that we have in there. So sales sums. And so this takes a lambda and this call. You need to give it some kind of variable name. Some people like to use X. I like more descriptive variables. And screen's lagging. So what are we going to do with this? We're just going to sum it. Sum this call. And that should give me a total at the bottom for each of the columns. So let's VStack sales sums and the sales totals. That's going to put one on top of the other. See, this actually adds up. 2212649. Excellent. So now I have a sum at the bottom of it based upon the category. So now if I add more categories, that'll automatically get pushed down. Or if I change this now to region, you see that total got pushed down. The years totals are the same, which is what we'd expect, but now it automatically extends. And this is the power of what you're talking about, Jeff, by moving into the array variables. And honestly, in my opinion, this is where Excel is going, where we stop thinking about what do I want to do with these cells and more what concepts do I want to manipulate. So the table that you were working with, Tammy, you could do the same kind of thing. If you can create your headers as an array here. So in this case, my headers are either going to be a transposed list of years or a transposed list of quarters, or in this case, I'm going to concatenate year and quarter with a Q in the middle of them to create a year quarter. And then that just gets sent all the way over there. And then I can address that by using the M2 hash to go as far over as that goes and perform this same formula across every column, down every row. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Cool. Does that answer your
So
question?
if I could paraphrase in my estimation what you're doing, so you're basically using that sales sums in two ways, one by region and then another summarizing it.
Yeah. So the sales sums, it will use whatever criteria is over here, and I have it set so I can toggle by either region or by column or by category. And so that, yeah, so it's going to create that grid. And then sales totals just doesn't really care what you're doing. It just says everything that's in there, I'm going to go column by column and add them up.
And then I've even seen where, so you have the total and you have above it those, you can put like lines between that easily.
Yes.
And you could even conditionally format it so that the total rows have like colors and different formatting.
Yep. Let me share one more screen here.
It's pretty amazing.
It is. And I have found, I love doing this thing. It's almost a game to me, but they're all practical applications. So this is a workbook that I designed recently for a client where they basically create bank statement summaries for their divisions. And so they'll send this out, and all of these are queried through Power Query. So they will select 4 different files that go into create these, and I will create a table of credits, a table of debits for the checking account, and the same thing for the credit card that they have. And then the subsidiaries have to go through and select all the categories. And then as they select those categories, this entire table at the bottom here is created with a single formula. Well, more or less. This reporting group is a lambda calculation that I've created. And I have it set up so they can have up to 4 reporting groups in there. And it basically will sum everything in these tables above and do counts, totals, and categorizations of them. So each of these groupings is a stack. Let me open it up. I'm sorry if this is not where you guys wanted to go.
Move off.
Well, but this is
Killing us.
fascinating,
No,
and this really ends up being the power of what we have here. What I have open here, this Excel Labs, is a free add-in that Microsoft's put out, and it provides an easy way to be able to address these complicated formulas. So since we're now on the topic of let and lambda, one thing that I will do with my let statements, compliments of Eric, who is in the chat here, is I'll add some notes in here on what I'm doing. And so I'm going to actually create headers. So separate from what I'm doing, I'm adding headers here. I'm going to filter down my raw data to get just a list of stuff that I want. And then I'm going to, again, go back to that simple thing of count ifs and sum ifs. So I'm going to move fast here, but all we're worried about here is the concepts. I'm going to come up with a list of categories for the bank transactions, and that's defined by the user here. So I get this list of categories, and so I have this list, and it's basically that similar to that list of regions or categories that we saw in that other spreadsheet. It's that virtual K2 list. And so now, instead of having it in the cell, I'm just holding it in memory. And I'm going to look at my tables, and I'm going to do a count wherever the category matches the category in that credit cat list that's just kind of held in memory, that K2 from that other table. So instead of looking at cells, I'm looking at basically virtual cells inside this formula. And I'm going to do a count of those and a sum of those. And this creates that table you saw in the other spreadsheet just in memory. So now we've got that list of categories, counts, and sums. It's not in any cells at this point. It's simply in memory. And then as I assemble those, I'm going to put a header on top of it. I'm going to put those values, and then I'm going to put the sums, those same sums that you saw me create in that other thing inside the let statement, I'm going to create here. So now I have that whole thing in memory, and I'm just going to kind of hold it in memory, and then that formula that you saw on the page takes all of those virtual stacks and creates one big stack of them. Find my header. And so we create each of those blocks. Now we stack them here. And then, like you said, we just apply a little bit of conditional formatting, make it look pretty. And this is the only downside I've reached so far with these array formulas is the conditional formatting has to extend beyond the range of cells I'm using, because it won't automatically shrink or contract with it. But I've assigned it to 250 or 200 rows, which is more than I know I'll need. And I've now built a full report with headers, with footers, with blank rows in between, all out of a single formula. All because my data was organized into tables. So we take those raw tables that you had, Tammy, we think about what do we want to do with them, assign them to variables, and then manipulate them inside these formulas, which is ultimately where you can go with these things. It all starts off by, stop sharing. Where's my stop share button? I think I'm done. It all starts with those sum ifs and countifs that you were doing. So work to, well, my suggestion to move into this area of Excel is to use filter, sort, and unique to find the headers and the row and column headers you need. Start experimenting with sum ifs and countifs, using those array things so they spill over the full range. And then once you start getting there, start introducing let to take those actual cells into a virtual space to do the kind of things that you want to do. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, no, that's fabulous. Thank you. And I'm glad you talked about tables, because, you know, the let and lambda stuff, that's really complex, but tables, I think, are not widely used, and they're so versatile. So I'm glad you touched on that.
Tables actually become your greatest strength to Excel. If you're working in Excel and you're saying, oh my gosh, this is driving me nuts, it's not Excel. It really is the structure of your spreadsheet. If you can go back and organize your data, and tables are the way you're going to do that in the best way, everything else will build off of that. Tables by their nature are structure reference. They're basically named ranges. And so you can address a full table, you can address the headers, you can address individual columns. And once you start doing that, you've got this block of data that you can begin manipulating. And then for me, the first places were filter, sort, unique to pull out subsets of that data, whether that's a full mini table, or it's just those column or row headers, and then sum ifs and countifs, and the kind of stuff you're doing in business. Those are some of the best tools you can use. XLOOKUP can also spill over those ranges, and it allows you to take control of your data in a much more comprehensive way. The other advantage of going back to tables is it forces you to consolidate your data. Too often I see spreadsheets where it's like, I've got this data here, I've got this data here. I need to reference this cell here in order to bring it over here. And before you know it, your table, your spreadsheet is nothing but a mess of frustration. If every piece of output refers directly back to your source tables, even if you're duplicating some things, you're going to have a much more streamlined spreadsheet, and you're going to eliminate a lot of headaches. Those formulas that you had adjoined to your table, Tammy, if you've got something where you're using those concepts a lot, what you did there is exactly the way you want to do it. You want to add those extra formulas to your tables if you're going to use those formulas a lot. If you need it one time, start with your source data, take it to the end point, and then just, let everything else be discarded at that point. Do we have any other questions? I'm talking a lot, and I'm taking a lot of time.
Hey, David, Daniel put a question in the chat. He asked, can you show how you cross-check the formula is working as designed? Seems risky if something gets missed.
That's a great question. Let me share my screen again as soon as I find my mouse.
Can I make a quick comment on that?
Yep.
And then my basic thing is when I've switched over from disconnected tables that aren't defined as tables, I find my spreadsheets have far fewer errors because the tables adjust automatically, and I don't have to remember to change formulas for sums. It's been a game changer on a pretty simple level, but it's been really good. So that helps me a lot.
So as you build these formulas, especially as they get long and complicated, they are not going to work the first time. I've been doing them enough that I have more of them work than, or more parts work than don't work, but almost invariably something doesn't work. And my favorite hack for that is the same way that we assign the variables as we go through. I assign a variable to my final result. I'm just going to call it extra var and make it an extra variable so that I don't lose what I'm looking to do. But now I try and find out, okay, what am I missing? And so in this case, I'll return one part, return sales total. I always get this, and then I will go through and say, okay, are these results the ones that I want? In the case of this one's extremely simple. So let me just return that extra var. So I can simply select these cells and make sure that the total, come down to the bottom here where the sum is and make sure that it matches. As far as the totals up here for the Gulf Coast, when I was building this yesterday, what I did is I got the Gulf Coast. I came back to my table and said, okay, let's try and match that up. So I'm going to filter this down to Gulf Coast. Filter this down to 2020. Here's my items. That total should be 319567. 319567. I've now cross-checked that number, and because I can get antsy, I'll probably check a couple of them just to make sure that they come out to where I want them to be. But once I've tested this formula and I know that it's sound, like Jeff said, no matter what changes, this is built. This is now a closed system, and it's going to always come out with the right answers. And because I'm doing these off of arrays where I'm looking at any given year or any given thing, I'm doing the same calculation on each of those cells. So if it works for one, it's going to work for all. So I do want to test out and manually check the first time, okay, what's planes for 2022? Make sure that works out. Okay, my SumIfs is good. I want to verify that that by call was the correct formula, not by row. So I'm going to check that column, make sure it sums out. Once that sums out, I know that it's good. And I've now devised my own system that I've checked, and I know no matter what inputs come in, it's going to be correct. Does that answer the question, Tim?
I think so. And then I'm assuming, like, the way you showed it is like if somebody was entering more data into your table and they typed like Southeast and they spelled it wrong or something, that would just add a new
category,
add a new row, and you'd be like, oh, that shouldn't be a separate category.
Right.
There's something in the data, so it's not missing it. Because I've had that issue. I have built my own like budgeting spreadsheet, and I've had that where if I misclassify like a date or a transaction, then the numbers aren't adding up. So I have to go back through and figure out where I, typed in a date wrong or a category wrong, and stuff like that. So.
And that's where using something like these dynamic arrays really comes in handy, as opposed to having kind of hard code. You say, well, I know these are my 7 categories. I'm just going to type these in. Well, by using dynamic arrays here, if you do get an input error, then it's going to show up there, and it's actually not going to be an error because it's going to automatically come in. Now, you might need to go fix it because you don't want it, but it will show up and it will be tallied correctly. And to your point on the errors like that, your input needs to be validated. And typically what I'm going to do there is I will have a lists page where I will say, okay, these are my categories, assign it to a name range. And then if I'm manually entering something, it's going to be validated where it's not going to allow you to add something that's not in that list. And it'll say, if you want to use this one, please first add it to the list. And so you have to add it there, and then you can come back here and it keeps your data protected. These formulas won't protect you against bad data, but they will accurately reflect whatever data you've been provided. Validating that data is a crucial step. And that comes on the input side of our ledger. If you're doing manual inputs of anything, everything should be validated so that you don't get entry errors. If I'm manually entering dates, I will typically, range bound that so that it will only accept dates, between say 30 days ago and 30 days from now. If I'm expecting it to be something that people are entering on an ongoing basis, you'll get errors back in the past. But if you add validation code that accepts errors but warns the user, you don't get date errors as you type in. One of my first projects, there were dates like 20022. So it's like in the year 20,000. It's like obviously that's bad, but if there's no validation, that slips through. So you add whatever you can to minimize the the potential for user errors.
Yeah. So dummy proofing.
Yeah.
Even from yourself, dummy proofing yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And the nice thing, if you're using drop-down lists, not only does it protect you against entry errors, it speeds entry because as you start entering, Microsoft will start pre-filling. It's like, oh yeah, Southeast, that's the one I want. And it makes it a lot quicker to enter.
Cool. We're getting close to time. There's another question from Daniel in chat, but I want to see if somebody else had another question. Make sure everybody get a chance to ask. Okay, so Daniel's question, he asked, can you share a few common reasons it fails in Fix?
They vary a lot. One of the places that I do a lot of sum ifs, a lot of count ifs, and they actually won't work with arrays. Like those virtual arrays, they require a solid range. If I'm trying that, then that won't work. Or it's just where I've missed a parameter or messed something up. Usually it's a stupid error on my part. And it's like, okay, why didn't this work? And that's when I go back through and I assign that extra variable and I have, bring in that range. Okay, what did I miss? What values does it have for that variable? And I can look at it and say, oh, it's 4 columns supposed to be 5 columns or whatever it is. Or if I'm building an array, what mistake did I make? And it's usually something where I made the error and I just didn't realize what I had done. And so I will break it out step by step in order to see, make sure that each step shows exactly what I want it to show. It really is just basically trial and error.
Does anybody else have any questions? I was thinking, David, if you wanted to kind of just let people know like how they like what you like services you provide, how they can get in touch with you. And I know David provides a lot of consulting or else he does a lot of this for people. So I want to kind of give you a chance to give your pitch if people want to reach out to you, connect with you more.
I appreciate that. Well, I saw you put my LinkedIn profile in there. I appreciate that. Probably the best way to get in touch with me. And I do data management spreadsheets. And no matter what it is, for me, it's a data management spreadsheet. My two main foci are basically, limited dashboards or reporting. Some of the stuff that you were showing there, Tammy, where it's like, I need to extract this kind of data and do this kind of report. The other thing I do are productivity spreadsheets where, just to help small business owners manage their business. I was have a project with a Christmas tree deck or a Christmas light decorating company down in Florida, where I will bring in their job information and help them manage it so they know what kind of decorations are being used at each job, how many man hours each job is going to provide, and just basically do this kind of thing where we bring in data, we apply it to a set of rules, and then we display the results, just like we did with the our sales by region, where it's data in, organized, data out. And just about anything you do really can become a data management issue. If you focus on what do I need to track, how do I get that into Excel, and what do I need to do with it once it's there?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that you're not going to be able, somebody on their own isn't probably going to be able to fix if they've got bad data management. I think that's where services of somebody like you that's got experience doing that is really helpful. So,
and honestly, Excel's biggest asset is its biggest weakness, and that's accessibility. It's open to everyone. We all have it on our computers at work. But unless you can spend most of your day in Excel, all these tools they're adding, I mean, it takes a lot to keep up with it. And it's fun. I mean, it's great, but it's like, unless it's your job, don't let it be your job. There are so many people out there that do what I do. And I'm not saying this as a way of, shilling for more work, but I mean, you're not going to go out and build your own CRM. You're not going to build your own accounting software. So if you've got something that's mission critical, just because Excel is the best tool in it, don't think that you have to be the person to do it. There's nothing wrong with saying, okay, this is what I need built, and having someone like me or any number of people on LinkedIn that do this, find someone and let them help. Like I say, I had fun today. I don't know if this was useful to any of you guys, but I hope so. If nothing else, I hope it's inspirational about what you can do with Excel.
For sure.